Okay, right. So I'm William Powrie. I'm convener of UKCRIC, and I've just really got a few slides to go through which give a little bit of a background to what UKCRIC is and what we're about. So apologies to those of you who might have seen this more times before than you would really like to, but hopefully to some of you at least it will be something new, and we can see what it's all about. So UKCRIC stands for the UK Collaboratorium for Research on Infrastructure and Cities, and it's a portfolio of research and innovation facilities and programmes with a mission to underpin the renewal, sustainment and improvement of infrastructure and cities in the UK and elsewhere. So that's really sort of what we're about. We have 15 member universities in the UK, and we are basically a major national institute for infrastructure and cities research. So it is in a sense similar to things like the Royce, the Turing and the Crick Institutes, but not similar in that we're not a legal entity and we are distributed around the UK, which was quite deliberate. And we also are probably slightly different in that we're looking at applying multiple disciplines to multiple problems. There are three strands of UKCRIC. There's the laboratories, which was what the bulk of the initial startup grant was to fund. There's also the urban observatories, which are a series of observatories which look at how people behave and interact with infrastructure up and down the UK. And also there is Daphne, which is the data analytics facility for national infrastructure. And this event is very much organised with the Daphne strand of UKCRIC. So basically it's about experimentation, observation of how people use and interact with infrastructure in the real world, and data analytics and simulation, which is the Daphne element. So the map shows how we're distributed. So we now have members Heriot-Watt and Edinburgh up in Scotland. It is our intention that we should have a partner at some point in Northern Ireland and also in Wales. And then if we did that, we would have at least one partner university in each of the UK regions. So there's various regions in England plus Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So that's the list of partners. And then we also have an affiliated facility, which is the V Simulators facility at the universities of Bath and Exeter. So those are the list of founding partners, and then Heriot-Watt and Edinburgh joined a little bit afterwards. So that's where we are. So the map, which we haven't got time to go into, or you probably can't see either, indicates what the facilities are. So the idea is that most of the partners have got something which can be used as a national facility. So basically that is something which can be used by anybody. You don't have to be a member of UKCRIC to be able to use it, and we have a process by which people can apply to use it. But obviously there is a cost associated with that, but that cost is the same as that we have to meet internally if we want to use the facilities that we host. So over 2019, we opened these 5 facilities. So these are all sort of new builds that were funded out of the UKCRIC grant from BEIS, which came via EPSRC. So there's the National Water and Wastewater Treatment and Test Facility at Cranfield. And a notable success of that was that Cranfield was the UKCRIC partner, which sort of identified that you could probably pick up COVID in wastewater before it became obvious in the population. There's the Distributed Water Infrastructure Facility at Sheffield. There is the National Green Infrastructure Facility at Newcastle, which is top right. The National Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction at Cambridge, which is bottom right. And then there's the National Infrastructure Laboratory at Southampton. And my colleague David Richards is going to say rather more about this particular facility, because this is notionally at least a Southampton hosted event. Although, of course, that is very much notional in the current climate. You might see some similarity between the Southampton building and the Cambridge building, and I believe that the architects were the same in each case. So we also have the observatories strand. So they are based at Newcastle, Birmingham, Bristol, Sheffield, and there's also one at Cranfield. And so they are looking at all sorts of things, including flooding, public health, transport, air quality, smart buildings, and they have in recent times been looking at the effects of COVID, and they are an amazing source of real-time urban data. So this graph just is an indication of traffic volumes across Tyne and Wear, Hull and Sheffield, and it's referred to a baseline prior to the first lockdown. So what we can see is that actually after the steep drop in the first lockdown, we've seen that traffic, and this is basically road traffic, is really not far short, and in some cases has spiked above where it was. And I think that is one of the major challenges with COVID, that the form of transport which has suffered hugely is public transport. And I think that making public transport okay to use in whatever world faces us in 6 or 12 months time is going to be a major challenge, because there's no doubt that, you know, this form of transport is probably one that contributes most to CO2 emissions. And again, we mustn't let COVID allow us to lose sight of the big picture, which is very much about zero net carbon. So the urban observatories have played a huge role in that, and I'm grateful to Phil James of Newcastle University for sharing the data with us. So most of this data is publicly available, so it can be accessed by researchers who can then use it for whatever purpose they want. So Daphne, the data analytics facility for national infrastructure, is very much part of the UKCRIC community. It's a computational platform to support data analysis and infrastructure research. And again, it gives us the opportunity to do very large scale analysis, simulation, access to data. How do we handle those large quantities of data? And we can begin to do visualization. So some of the work that we've been doing is looking at how things might pan out in the Oxford-Cambridge arc, for example, and all of that modelling starts to need facilities of the type which are provided by Daphne. So UKCRIC has got 4 missions, and these were very much developed through a series of workshops from the bottom up. So the first one is about transformation of infrastructure and urban systems for a changing world. And this is really about the resilience piece. So the most obvious change is, for example, the change that we expect to happen in our climate and in the weather. And we've seen some examples of that over the past few months, including the Carmod incident on Network Rail, which I think was pretty much directly linked to climate change and different patterns of rainfall and storminess. But it's also actually recognizing that there are other infrastructure can itself be transformational if we get it right, but then it also needs to be resilient against changing patterns of use and societal expectations, and also emergent technologies. So it was not very easy to move our waste management system from landfill to recycling, because we had to change the logistics, we had to change the facilities that we had, and we had to change people's attitudes. We also had to change financial models. And the same is true really with the electrification of the road network, that when you look at the sort of the charging points, if we're no longer charging a large amount of money for vehicle tax duty in petrol tax, then where does the cost of maintaining the road network come from? So we need to move to some sort of road user charging. So basically, that whole business of how infrastructure reacts to a changing world and how infrastructure can change the world and change the way people live is very much the focus of this first mission. So that's really what we might call the resilience or the transformational mission. The next one is infrastructure and urban systems for one planet living. And I think that pretty much speaks for itself. That's very much about sustainable infrastructure. So that is the one where we would probably put a lot of the effort into zero net carbon and so on. It's basically about using our infrastructure and using our resources and our energy efficiently and effectively within the ability of the planet to sustain. The third mission is about ownership, governance and business models. And this recognises that a lot of our infrastructure is unaffordable. It can be unaffordable to build, unaffordable to run, unaffordable to maintain, unaffordable to own, unaffordable to use. So some of that is not just about the efficiency or the effectiveness. It's an interesting point with HS2 that possibly only 50% of the total cost is the civils work. So even if you halved the cost of the civils work through better efficiencies, you'd still be spending a huge amount of money in just making the thing happen. And that is just because of the systems that we work in, the governance, the sort of the legal aspects, or the accountancy and the finance and so on. So we do need to have a mission within UKCRIC which is looking at trying to have business models and governance systems which make infrastructure more effective and more affordable. And then the fourth mission was one that was slightly unexpected, although it turns out to be very timely. It's about infrastructure and urban systems as drivers of equity, inclusion and social justice. And if you like, this is the levelling up agenda of UKCRIC. It also recognises that if we get infrastructure right, for example, perhaps encouraging active travel by walking and cycling, that will also promote a healthy, happy and productive lifestyle for the whole, for all of our citizens. So that's the fourth of the missions. So these are the missions into which UKCRIC is organised, and the idea is that within each of these missions we will have propositions and projects and programmes of research which help in some way to deliver a part of one or more of the missions. So we've been quite busy since our inception. We've done a lot of stakeholder engagement, so I won't read out the whole list, but there's some examples here of groups that we've engaged with, and that's very much sort of on the part of the whole of the infrastructure community. So there's learned societies in there, the Net Zero Coalition Working Group, overseas governments, including Singapore and Newcastle in Australia. It's possibly worth noting that we've had a couple of good workshops with local authorities, the Key Cities Group and the Core Cities Group. And then, of course, along came COVID. But nonetheless, this is a good framework for continuing to engage with the stakeholders. We've been plugged into the international community. We have an advisory board chaired by Cynthia Mitchell, formerly of the University of Technology in Sydney. And we have attended and actually played a leading role in a number of conferences around the world, first of all physically, and then since then virtually. But in particular the ISNGI, which is the International Symposium on Next Generation Infrastructure. We supported 4 CDT proposals. There were actually 2 on what we might call dry infrastructure and 2 on water. The 2 water ones were funded, so there are 2 UKCRIC CDTs in water. And in fact, some of the universities, in particular ourselves at Southampton and Birmingham, are running CDTs in sustainable infrastructure and cities. And it's the same title. And the intention is that once things start to unlock after COVID, or when we've got to grips with COVID, I wouldn't say after COVID, then basically we will have some interaction between our particular cohorts. So I think we've just started about 12 PhD students or industrial PhD students at Southampton in our CDT, and that's basically with no support from EPSRC or no formal support from EPSRC at all. So clearly the demand is there for this high-level doctoral training in infrastructure and cities. There is also the CDICE, which is the Centre for Postdoctoral Development in Infrastructure, Cities and Energy, and that's been led by Loughborough with Birmingham and Cranfield. And that is going to be to run training and development, a sandpit programme to develop new research ideas to the net zero carbon challenge, and also follow things through to impact. So again, that was supported by the UKCRIC community and UKCRIC, the coordination node, in terms of a letter of support. We had a number of research projects that involve UKCRIC universities. So Plexus and Corona were sort of pump priming grants, looking at how we could get people working together from across UKCRIC using the laboratory facilities, also the city observatories. Achilles is a programme grant looking at earthworks for transportation infrastructure. There's been various others, pervasive sensing of buried pipes, so the PipeBots programme. And then with Network Rail, there are research framework contracts with various universities, most of whom are members of UKCRIC there. So there's a number of things that we have facilitated there. I mentioned the Oxford-Cambridge ARC. That has been a bit of an exemplar case study with a lot of the work led by Jim Hall through his Mistral programme. But we've also done some scoping projects for East West Rail. The Forley Waterside development is a more local thing here, but again, that's been slightly put on hold by COVID. Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal is what brought Edinburgh and Heriot Watt universities on board. And we are looking to sign a collaboration agreement with HS2 that would provide a framework for any UKCRIC university to be engaged by HS2 to carry out research and innovation. So some example collaborative bids that have been coordinated by UKCRIC. There were 2 circular economy bids. So there was essentially one which is based at I think Sheffield, and the other of which is based at UCL. There's the Transforming Construction Network Plus, which is led by Jennifer White at Imperial. Then there's also a grant application currently under review led by Chris Rogers, which is Engineering Infrastructure and Cityscapes for Health. So all of these sort of interdisciplinary proposals, some of which have been awarded, others of which are under consideration, have been brokered and put together by UKCRIC and members of UKCRIC. So where do we want to go? We're about to be awarded transition funding by EPSRC, which I think would hopefully see us transition unequivocally to an institute. We still want to be distributed. We want to be recognised nationally and internationally as the UK Centre for Infrastructure and Cities Research. We want to be the go-to place for advice by policymakers and government. We want an intimate linkage with local authorities to help deliver 21st century cities and infrastructure, strong collaborations with industry, and we would like for every major infrastructure and cities project to be an informed learning experience, and also every major infrastructure and cities project to engage with all relevant disciplines, stakeholders, to embrace systems thinking and practices, and not just kind of apply yesterday's solutions in a piecemeal way. We have major challenges that we face, including net zero carbon, recovery from COVID, levelling up, and also health and well-being, and infrastructure and cities. Getting that right has got a huge role to play in all of that. Okay, so that's how you can get in touch. We have a mailing list, so people are very welcome to come to UKCRIC events. So if you're not already signed up, you can sign up at if you drop an email to hello@ucric.com, you'll then get the UKCRIC newsletter. There's a Twitter hashtag as well. Though personally, I don't really tweet. I'm still waiting for something witty enough to tweet, and that might be a long time coming. And there's our website. So there's lots of ways of getting in touch. Okay, and that's it.